A final news topic of the week. We squeezed this one in at the last minute because we checked it out and we actually thought, wow, this is pretty good and possibly, I think definitely actually worthy of a full video. But let's get straight to it. Ace Combat 7, which is one of John's favourite games, has actually arrived on Nintendo Switch. Unreal Engine game. There were some concerns about the quality of the port. Oliver and I have played it. Oliver, what are your thoughts? Because I actually think it's a really good port based on what I've seen so far.
Yeah, overall, I think it's quite a good conversion, at least from what I've played so far. I've played a couple hours so far. It renders at 720p at 30 FPS in dock mode. I've also played it portably. It looks pretty respectable there, but I did not get a count yet on that one. No calamitous frame rate drops. It looks very consistent to me. I only spotted one or two when I was going through some very heavy explosions, so just really momentary dips there. Possibly with no AA, maybe with a lighter post-process AA, but it's actually kind of interesting because if you compare this to the console versions, at least from what John covered back in 2019, the Xbox One version is also 720p with post-process A, and it aimed for 60, but it did not do a good job of hitting 60. So this is one of those cases where the Switch is actually measuring up pretty well in the top-line figures against the console versions. But I think the key thing here is that all the gameplay elements that are really critical here and critical to the game's visual makeup are presented. So you get draw distance for the terrain that stretches all the way out into the distance. You don't have any pop-in, really obtrusive pop-in for the terrain elements. You do get some pop-in for the trees and stuff like that. That's pretty obvious, but not for large masses of land, which is obviously important when you have a draw distance that stretches, potentially kilometers away. And you get very nice volumetric clouds, which are a pretty critical aspect of Ace Combat 7. Very nice clouds. I would say absolutely the best looking clouds on Switch. I don't think there's any question there. So if you're tallying that one up, I think these are absolutely the best clouds on Switch. Very good looking volumetric clouds with not too many artifacts to them. And they're lit properly by the sun, and they have that nice shadowing beneath them. They look like proper volumetric clouds, some of the best you'll see in games, I'm sure. The explosions are impactful and screen filling, and the lighting looks pretty good. They're using shadow maps. They aren't cutting out anything too obtrusive, so it's not been stripped to the bone or anything like that. Mm-hmm. Looks pretty solid overall. Relative to the other console versions, I've not played them myself, but just judging from some footage, the draw distance has been pulled in quite a bit for things like trees. Again, not the critical elements, but little incidental details along the world. They do seem to be drawing in a lot closer to the camera. Some of the lighting has been simplified, I think. Maybe they've stripped back materials a bit. It's running on Unreal Engine 4, but it doesn't have quite as much of that UE4 look to it. I think they might be simplifying some of the material properties, stripping back some material layers, something like that. Overall, though, it looks pretty good. Running pretty well. I'm satisfied with it so far. I'll need to do more comparisons directly with the last gen console versions, probably Xbox One. But so far, I'm quite pleased with it. It's a very good conversion, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, cool. Alex, you've seen the footage, right?
Yeah, I did. And I thought it looks pretty great. It looked like Ace Combat to me, based upon my memories of John's
video. It was a good start.
Which is, well, it's better than, I think of...
Yeah, I know what you're saying.
Yeah. Any of the other UE4 conversions we've seen, like the original Ark or... Outer
Worlds, No Man's Sky as well.
Original No Man's Sky, where it's like if you were to really squint your eyes, you'd be seeing it. But then if you open your eyes, you're like, oh my goodness, this actually looks good. And I think based upon Oliver's little preview here, consistent performance is pretty important, as well as maintaining the clouds, which is probably the headline feature of the game's visuals, next to the craft and the explosions. So I think that's awesome. I'm just very curious to see if it is using dynamic res, I'm always curious now in this almost before cross-gen territory for Switch 2, what does this look like on the Switch 2? Since it's such a late release on Switch, do they patch it for Switch 2 when it comes out? I'm just very curious about those things that we still have no idea about.
Yeah, I do remember, Alex, just prior to filming this, you just said, has it still got the clouds in there? Has it still got the volumetric clouds in there? So
it's the most important thing.
And then Oliver was basically saying, best clouds on Switch. It does look great, though. I played it handheld, and there were some aliasing artifacts, and it's visibly low-res handheld, but it still played great and looked great, I think. It just looks really, really cool. And it is a great game. So, yeah, I think we're going to have to do a full video on this because I just think it's fantastic and titles like this should be highlighted. But certainly, first impressions pretty great, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's very positive. I've taken a look at some other UE4 titles on Switch. I remember Hogwarts Legacy back in the day,
Right.
not so good. But this is a very different kind of UE4 game where they were targeting 60 FPS in the consoles already. It's a very different scale, but also, they're not using some key technologies in there that you might see in other games because of that scale. So maybe that's helping them out a little bit.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, it looks really, really good. I'm excited to play more. One thing I am a little bit worried about, though, is I know in John's coverage he did note that the game does get heavier as it goes on. So
Right.
it could very well be the case that in some of these later missions, there's a little bit more difficulty with the frame rate. I will have to check for dynamic res in there as well. But so far, so good. I think it's a good port.